Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's presentation, My Year on Safari, Stories from Guiding Across Southern Africa, is brought to you by Nat Hab Expedition Leader Lorraine Doyle. Lorraine earned honors degree in nursing in Bristol and worked as an intensive care sister for a decade in the UK before returning to her native Africa and becoming certified as a Big 5 vehicle-based and walking guide. She founded her own training company, Africa Nature Training, in 2002 and has been sharing her expertise through guiding at the Madikwai Game Reserve and writing her column, The Wild Guide, in a South African travel magazine since 2017. Born and raised in Zimbabwe, Lorraine combines her medical background with extensive guiding certifications and has explored numerous national parks across the USA, Botswana, South Africa, and Zimbabwe throughout her career. Well, I'm glad your career has taken you to us today. Lorraine, welcome. The show is yours. Take it away.
Great. Thanks very much, Rob. As always, it's lovely to be here and to have the opportunity to share some of my experiences with your guests. So as you quite rightly said, I titled this My Year on Safari and Stories from Guiding Across Southern Africa, simply because I figured as we're getting to the end of 2025, I thought it would be a really nice thing to be able to share with people something of what I've been privileged to do this year with Natural Habitat. And yeah, to showcase a couple of the Natural Habitat safaris that I've been guiding on. So the first one has been related to Southern African Odyssey, which covers part of what is known as KAZA, which is essentially a short version of the Kavango-Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area. And this is one of the largest conservation areas in the world, approximately 106 million acres. And essentially the concept behind it is that conservation knows no borders. And so in particular, the challenge has come in recent decades over elephant population numbers. And so the idea behind this project was to allow interconnected corridors for wildlife in general, but elephants in particular, to have greater access to land. And as part of the Southern African Odyssey, we go to a number of areas within this KAZA area, including the Chobe National Park in Botswana, Hwange National Park here in Zimbabwe, and then also part of what used to be called the Caprivi Strip. It's now known as the Zambezi Zone, which is this little spit of land that actually belongs to Namibia, but really is this sliver between Botswana, Zambia, and Namibia. So those are some of the areas that this particular safari covered over that I've been on this year. And then the other one that I've been integrally involved with is one within South Africa's borders. And it's part and parcel of this portion of the country, which is sort of up in the northeastern sector of the country. This is where a lot of our big South African game reserves are. And as you will see that some of this, also there are transfrontier areas that link into Zimbabwe, also partly into Botswana. You can see the Kalahari Transfrontier Park here. And so again, we're trying to get into this idea that we really need to start looking at opening up space, more space for wildlife, and having greater connectivity, so we have less fragmentation which always is challenging when you're trying to manage natural ecosystems. And so what I thought was I'd like to perhaps introduce you to some of the local guides and people that I've worked with during this safari year. Some of the local people living in the areas. Then look a little bit at the landscapes, and then go through some of the iconic animals and perhaps some stories that accompany some of the series of photographs that I'll share with you. So this wonderful lady is called Safret, and she works for Wilderness Safaris in Zimbabwe. And she is our guide when we go through the Victoria Falls, and has a wealth of knowledge about the Zambezi River and Victoria Falls in particular. And then we're also privileged on the Zimbabwe Odyssey, or the Southern African Odyssey trip, to meet some of the local people from Impalila Island in the Zambezi zone. So they very kindly always perform for our guests. And as you can see, just really incredible people. And this little girl was a very serious little girl who was coming round. So there's always guests always are very generous in giving donations, and this little girl was on this particular occasion given the basket to come and collect the money. And yeah, this very sweet little face. And then just showing some of the ways in which people still live within these areas. So this is on the Zambezi River. These are fish traps. So these are fishermen using fish traps. So this is subsistence fishing, and it's what a lot of people in this area are dependent on. The reason I included this photograph is I just wanted to highlight that big animal in the foreground is a crocodile. And on the bank are people fishing, and there are cattle. So on the Namibian side, when you're kind of in the Chobe National Park, you have an island, and part of that is actually Namibian, and the Namibian section is agricultural. And so as you can see here, you have cattle and people fishing, and you have these really big crocodiles lurking not too far away. And so for me, it's always quite humbling when I look at things like this, to think about when we go to these places, about the different lifestyles that many of the people living in these rural areas actually experience. And then this is the crew on board the Zimbabwean Dream, which is the houseboat that we use on Lake Kariba. And these are an amazing, amazing group of people who are always incredibly joyful. And Ernest here, this gentleman, I don't know if my arrow shows, but he's got dance moves for years and is a real entertainer. And then this is something that links very closely into conservation, and is something that's very, very close to my heart. This is actually at a anti-poaching camp, the Wekau camp in Hwange National Park. It's partly sponsored by Wilderness Safaris and also Panthera, which is an American-based NPO. And what they are doing is trying to reduce poaching in Hwange National Park, doing snare removals, patrols. And these are a group of incredibly dedicated and very brave men and women who are really trying hard to protect wildlife in Zimbabwe. So then going on a little bit more to the landscapes. So this is a photograph taken of Victoria Falls. It's actually a side view of the falls. You're seeing Devil's Cataract, which is on the left, and then you're getting a sort of side angle of the main falls. This was taken on my last safari of the year in Zimbabwe, which was end of September, beginning October. And so by that time, the Zambezi has dropped quite a lot. So there's not as much water coming over the falls, but it is actually really nice because you do get to see not only the mist, which can sometimes absolutely drench everything, but you also get to see some of the rainbows and also some of the incredible gorge that has been created by the Zambezi River. One of the things that is, for me, so spectacular about being able to do these safaris, we have extraordinary sunrises and sunsets in Southern Africa. And the next few slides are simply a few, just a selection taken from various locations on the trip. So this one is quite iconic. This is Lake Kariba. And Lake Kariba is a man-made lake. It was made in the 1950s when they dammed the Zambezi River. And the trees that you can see are known as drowned trees. So very hardwood trees, and they've been standing in water since 1958 when the dam was created. And they are very iconic in terms of any photograph you see pretty much from this part of the world that has that landscape. It's going to have been taken at Lake Kariba. You also get incredible reflections across the lake at sunset. And then this particular photograph was taken in Hwange National Park. So you have a lot of these, they're known as ilala palms. The elephants love the fruits. The elephants will stand shaking the palm trees to get the actual fruit down. But almost a surprise, I guess, to people. So they're not date palms, but I think people don't really expect to see this sort of palm tree in Africa. And yet they're very much part and parcel, especially of Hwange National Park. This one was taken in South Africa. So this photograph is part of one of the places we go to. It's in the Waterberg region of South Africa, and it has these beautiful mountains. And on this particular day, there was just lovely light with moonrise as well. And then all these white-browed sparrow weaver nests in the picture as well. And this one was taken from Mala Mala, which is in borders the Kruger National Park. But what you're looking onto there is actually the end of the Drakensberg Mountains. So the Drakensberg Mountains form this barrier, often referred to as the barrier of spears, down the central sort of ridge of South Africa. And from Mala Mala, where this was taken, when it's clear, you can actually see the mountains in the distance. And this is what, when this photograph was taken. And then this was just, I just particularly like the fact that of the colors and then the sort of silhouettes in the foreground of the trees. So I mentioned about the KAZA conservation area and really needing to be a place for elephants. And when the World Wildlife Fund was involved in the very first aerial survey of elephants that was done across the KAZA area, they did, it was actually done in 2022, and then the figures were released in 2023. And what they found is across that KAZA region, there's around 297,000 elephants. So there's a very large elephant population across that 106 million acres. And what I just wanted to show here is this was taken at the lodge we stay in Hwange, and those elephants really are standing pretty close to where guests are sitting, and provided as humans we show them the appropriate level of respect, they are more than happy to be there and, you know, to just go about their daily business really not very concerned about us as humans. And it's an incredible privilege to be able to be in that close proximity to such majestic animals. So this was taken on the Chobe River, and one of the things that happens, especially in the dry season, is elephants will cross from the mainland, if you will, across to an island, which has got a lot more vegetation and sort of water grasses and so on, that actually give them nutrition during the dry season. And so you have these crossings a number of times a day of elephants actually swimming, because they're really quite good swimmers, across the Chobe River. And what's very sweet is you have the little elephants that obviously also have to keep up. And if they start lagging behind, you'll often have an auntie or one of the relatives will actually bump these little elephants along just to help them get across. This one was taken on Matusadona, which is in Lake Kariba. And I think for me, what I really loved about this was just this elephant's eye and just his whole posture. He was just very relaxed, this beautiful bull. And yeah, just kind of watching us, not really concerned about us, and just happily feeding on some mapani. So again, speaking of elephants, large groups of elephants in places like Hwangi, really mixed groups. As you can see here, this is obviously, you know, part of a herd with everything from tiny little baby elephants all the way through, you know, to mature females. And water in this landscape, especially in the dry season, plays a huge part in maintaining wildlife in Hwangi. There is no natural water, surface water in Hwangi National Park. Everything comes from subterranean wells. So all of this water is pumped. And without that water, Hwangi National Park and all of this wildlife actually wouldn't exist. So it was actually the brainchild of a gentleman called Ted Davison, way back in the 1960s, that took this land that actually had was arid and pretty much had no real value, and turned it into this wildlife haven. This was just a little family group of elephants. You see these little groups of ellies, and very often they'll either, I'm not sure in this one if they were drinking water, but sometimes what they're doing is actually taking up minerals from the soil because it's lacking in their food. It's something called geophagia, so eating of soil for nutrients. And elephants love water. So a couple of youngsters just sparring in the water, splashing around, and just forming part of the broader landscape. I think you've got elephants in the background, zebras and impalas in the foreground, and this kind of mixed environment. So this was also taken at Hwangi. Very characteristic of the bushveld of Southern Africa. So not the huge wide open plains and parkland savanna that we see in East Africa, but much more of a sort of a wooded savanna that we see in Southern and Central Africa. And this one was also just to show some elephants in the background, but what's snoozing in the foreground. I think one of the animals that for many people is one of their real reasons perhaps for coming on safari, and that of course is lions. And these ones were not particularly interested in anything, just having a nice snooze in the sun, as cats will do. Elephants not in the slightest bit fazed by them, and so they were just essentially going about their business, each to their own. So lions and lion cubs will play, and this is actually a hide at one of the camps in Hwangi. But these young lions, it's like, I mean, they're sub-adults, they had decided that they quite liked this, and it seemed to form a really good playground. And so, fortunately, there were clearly no people sitting inside it, but they decided that they were going to take up residence and start leaping around. And it just so happened that there was a complete reflection on the day when I took the photo. And then this one had decided that not only was, I think it's a young male, not only was he going to play around, he was also going to start chewing at varying parts of the structure. And this is typical of any cat. Love to play with things, and lions are no different. Obviously, cubs or any young animal are always incredibly cute, and really this little one was just very curious. So his brothers and sisters were much more reticent. They didn't want to come forward. But what struck me about this was just the sheer size of the paws of this tiny little cub with these enormous feet, just to give you some idea of how big this animal is actually going to become one day. Just another cute little spotty, still got a lot of spots. Another one that was just very curious about what were these humans and why were they here. This one less so. This one had decided to just take a snooze. I just thought it was quite ironic that it had decided to snooze right next to a skull. But it also found itself a little pillow, this pile of dirt that it had put its head on. Female lions, so lionesses are very tolerant, but sometimes they've just had enough. And this particular female was tired of this cub harassing her. And as you can see, she's just wrinkling up her upper lip in a prelude to, either growling or possibly giving the cub a swipe, because clearly she's just had enough. This one just decided that it was, I don't know, yawning, had decided that it was going to collapse on mom, and just happened to stick its tongue out at the same time as I took the photograph. This was an interesting interaction between two young males. This was a standoff. They had this buffalo skull, and neither one was letting go. There was a great deal of growling, and for as long as we sat there, they just kept on hanging on and growling at each other. I'm sure in the end one or the other probably would have won, but it was quite interesting to watch the interaction. This was just a particularly beautiful female, very big lioness, beautiful, powerful lioness. And this one was taken actually at Mala Mala, and those are flies on the lion. So they had been eating a particularly smelly carcass, and obviously all of these flies had settled on his face, and yeah, I guess not a particularly comfortable situation. This was also a very interesting interaction, and I think for me, this is from a safari perspective. Seeing the animals is one thing, but watching them interact with each other or other species is what makes it so incredible. And this lion had been sleeping. His brother, we had seen his brother lying by the river, fast asleep, with the tummy so big he didn't know what to do with himself. And this lion clearly wanted to also go and get a drink, but he didn't want to leave the carcass. And every time he turned his back, the vultures came in. And so as fast as he left, he would come racing back to chase the vultures off. And so this went on until eventually he gave up and he just lay down pretty much by the carcass and stayed there, waiting for his brother to come back, who would have come back at some point, so that he could then go and drink. But yeah, he wasn't very happy with these vultures at all. And sometimes the light is just beautiful. And this was taken as the sun was setting in Wangi. And this boy was just an incredibly handsome lion. I think, yeah, very, very Lion King looking, very majestic. And then obviously some of the spotty cats, they are also very high, I think, on people's lists. And cheetahs in particular, there's only approximately 7,000 left in the wild in the world. And so every cheetah encounter is always special. And this next series of photographs was just a really special interaction. And it was actually made all the more special because these photographs only got taken because somebody loaned me a camera, their spare camera that they had taken on safari with them, because my camera dropped on the boat and stopped working. And so yes, I'm very grateful that I was loaned the camera to take this series of photographs because it shows a really endearing interaction between this cub and the mother. So he suddenly decided he was going to get up and just peer out from underneath mom's legs, I guess the equivalent of a toddler peering out from mom's skirt. Then decided that instead of going round mom, I'm going to go under mom's tummy and then stick my head out the other side. Then I'm going to go right the way through, and then both mom and I are going to have a nice stretch. Then we're going to stretch a little bit further. And then we're going to walk down the mound and we're going to go and sit somewhere and pose very nicely so that we could both have our photographs taken. And it's not often that you get the privilege to spend time with cheetahs like this. They're often, because they are heavily persecuted is probably the wrong word, but in terms of other cats or other predators, they really are at the kind of bottom of the food chain. And so they're very, very skittish often. And so, yeah, to have these two interacting like that was very special. This is two brothers. This is on a South African photo. And these particular brothers, they're both about, I think they're probably close on 11 years old now, but very relaxed cheetahs. And they were literally came down in front of us to the river to drink. Same two boys on another occasion, and they just came out of the bush and were walking right towards us. And then they actually got closer and closer, eventually so close that I couldn't take it with my camera lens, and then walked straight and walked past the vehicle. So other spotty cats. So these ones, very special because they're much more elusive. And these ones in particular, so at certain areas, particularly in the Sabi Sands, leopards have become quite relaxed over years. But in many reserves, as at Marataba, where this was taken, they're still very skittish. It comes from a history of these areas being farmed and farmers not wanting predators because of livestock. And we were actually on the little pontoon boat on the river, and this female and her cub were lying on the bank. And this is just a really, really unusual sighting for Marataba. So the next sort of set of photographs are much more typical of Mala Mala, the Sabi Sands areas where leopards have become very habituated over time. And this is just a number of pictures just of different leopards, just showing what magnificent cats they are. This is a young male, I think we call them a Tumi male. This was one of the cubs. I think mom was actually trying to feed on a carcass in a very shaky tree, and the cub was just hanging out down at the bottom. Obviously, leopards will, especially in areas where there is high lion populations and things like spotted hyenas, they are very nervous of their kills being taken, and so they will hoist them up trees. So it's not uncommon there to see leopards up in trees. This particular leopard had decided to actually cross the river. Leopards, like many cats, don't actually like wet feet very much. And so crossing any body of water for leopards is something that they don't necessarily do particularly happily. But she had decided that there was no option to get to where she wanted to go, so into the water she went. I just liked this picture because it actually shows how extraordinarily long leopards' whiskers are, technically known as vibrissae. So just, yeah, very, very highly sensitive, and allows them to navigate their way, especially in sort of tight areas. So one of the real specials on safaris, wild dogs. Sometimes we get to see them, often we don't. But on a couple of occasions, we were just really privileged. One of the packs had been denning, and we were privileged enough to see some of the pups. And this little one, for some reason, had picked up a leaf, and with his big Mickey Mouse ears, was just very interested in watching what was going on with his leaf prize in his mouth. So also, other members of the dog family, other canids, things like black-backed jackals. So really, really important parts of ecosystems, known as mesocarnivores, and also really important in keeping things like rodent populations under control. And then neither cat nor dog, hyenas, completely in their own family. And this was so these are spotted hyenas, and this was a mother with two of her youngsters. The youngsters are very curious, so much so that you often have to actually chase them away from vehicles, because what you don't want is them actually learning to touch vehicles, and especially because then they'll start chewing on vehicles, and that definitely is not something that you want, given the incredible power of their jaws. But they do cute really well. I know a lot of people are not necessarily overly fond of hyenas, I think partly because of things like the Lion King, but they really are amazing animals in so many ways. And when they're youngsters like this, they're also incredibly cute. So this is also a hyena, but this is a brown hyena. And this is a very rare photograph, in that it was taken in daylight, and this animal was just looking at us. They're very shy normally, and they're much more crepuscular or nocturnal, so you see them far less often. And so this was just an incredibly privileged sighting. This one's a little bit of Where's Waldo? This is a youngster, a young brown hyena in a tufa cave in Madikwe. And yeah, for a while we didn't actually see it. And then it moved. And then suddenly we were like, oh, it's not all rock. There's actually a little, there's a hyena there. And he was just poking his little nose out. I think there must have been others in the den there, but this was the only one we saw. And then neither cat nor dog. This is actually a mustelid. It's a honey badger. And this was just also a very fortunate sighting. We were looking up at this sort of hillside, and the next thing, the rock moved. And it turned out it wasn't actually a rock. It was this little chap poking his nose out. Also secretive, not often seen. So yeah, a very, very lucky sighting. And then on to some of the other sort of non-carnivores, if you will. Hippos. So on these trips, we generally see, especially in on the Chobe and up on the Zambezi, but also in some of the rivers in South Africa, a lot of hippos. And this one was just particularly cute because this was a little hippo, and when they're that small, if they can't touch the bottom, they'll sit on mom's back because hippos can't swim. If they get into deep water, they drown. They need to be able to stand. So they can run along the bottom of water, but they can't actually stay submerged for long periods, and they certainly can't swim. And then this was just one that popped up next to us and was giving us the beady eye. So yeah. And then a real privilege. This we only see in South Africa. When we go into any of the other countries in Southern Africa, currently there are no rhinos. They've essentially been poached to regional extinction. And where there are rhinos, they're kept in very, very secure locations where visitors are not allowed. This is a double privilege because these rhinos, as you can see, have got horns. The one in particular, an incredibly beautiful long horn. And the reason I say that's an extra privilege is because in many areas now we dehorn our rhinos to protect them. This mom and calf actually kept grazing and grazing and grazing and grazing right towards us until also I couldn't take pictures because my lens was too long. And then they kind of just grazed their way past the vehicle, totally unperturbed by us. This one decided it was nap time, but as you can see, still ears quite vigilant, and then an oxpecker sitting on its back. This female has been dehorned. This is more typical of seeing rhinos. And what was particularly cute about this is she had this very small calf with this lovely little snub nose, and just they're just incredibly sweet when they're this sort of age. But yeah, again, just really privileged. These are all white rhinoceros or square-lipped. We saw, I think, on this entire season of 10 safaris, or 6 in South Africa, I think we saw 1 black rhino. So black rhinos, much more scarce, much rarer, and also a little bit more nocturnal. And then the ones we often overlook because they're so common, this being an impala, but incredibly beautiful. And then we get the uncommon. So this is a roan antelope. These antelope largely seen kind of further north, so into places like Zimbabwe. And then also eland. So very shy antelope, the largest of our southern African antelope. And I always joke and say they're the original cow that jumped over the moon, because this incredibly heavy antelope can clear a 6 or an 8 foot fence without any problem whatsoever. And then possibly, for anyone who was on the vehicle with me at the time, they will probably remember it because I was so excited. We were driving and it was an overcast grey sort of day. Nothing much was actually happening. And I was like, that's a strange rock. And then I realized it wasn't a rock at all. And it's actually a Temming's ground pangolin, probably one of the most trafficked animals in the world for its scales. And yes, to actually be able to see a totally wild one, no tracking devices on it, out in the open during the day, was just, yeah, I think if anyone was to ask me kind of what was the safari highlight sighting of 2025 for me, this little creature, I have to say, would definitely be it. And then back to common warthogs. We see a lot of them, but really a very crucial part of our ecosystems. And then the not so common, so these are actually bush pigs. So these are much more crepuscular or nocturnal. They live in much more wet areas, and we don't very often see them. Relatively common animal, plain zebra, suddenly stampeded in all directions. There was an attempted lion attack. The lion missed, but the reason for just showing these photographs is how quickly things change. 1 minute you're watching a group of zebras drinking, and the next minute there's pandemonium. Giraffe, always photogenic, and these two were just, was actually two males who were doing some what we call play sparring, but it was just the particular angle that I just liked. And then we do see baboons. So these are chacma baboons. We don't have any great apes in southern Africa. We actually have a fairly poor primate diversity. But these are always really good value when you see them, because they're just incredibly playful, especially the youngsters. And we sat on this particular occasion and watched these guys for quite some time. This next little sequence is just a really cute sequence. These are ground squirrels. And this was a mother and a youngster, and she started grooming him. And we watched while she kept grooming, and she groomed him some more. And then he wanted to get away. And if you have a look, she's actually got her front paw on him, and she was trying to hold onto him to stop him from running away. Anyway, eventually he escaped her clutches and off he ran. But yeah, just a really interesting interaction. If you see, they've got these very flat tails, and what they do is they live in these very hot environments. They actually flip those tails up over their bodies, and they use them as a sort of a sun shield when it gets very hot. This was just a quick snapshot of a tree squirrel, and I just happened to catch it mid-leap. They're actually really very agile, and this little one had just happened to decide he was changing space. And then, not to overlook some of the other animals that we get to see on safari. So sometimes we get to see some really special birds. We have an incredible avian diversity in the sub-region, and many, many very beautiful birds. But this one in particular is quite special. This is our largest owl. This is a giant, or a Vero's eagle owl. And this is actually a youngster. This is a chick. Obviously not a tiny chick, because it's fully feathered, but we sat and watched this, and the parent was actually also in the tree. But to see them during daylight hours, again, very fortunate. Can't really see it on this photograph because the eyes are so wide open, but they have these beautiful pink eyelids, which is quite an interesting feature. So this is, when it's flying, is probably Southern Africa's most photographed bird. This is a lilac-breasted roller. But this one was just really interesting because this one was nesting. So we were fortunate enough, the guide we were with actually had been watching and observing them, and they'd been kind of going in and out. And so we sat there for a while, and eventually I managed to get one with just his head poking out. This is a bird that used to be called a gymnogene. It's now called an African harrier hawk. Again, a bird that is very interesting. It has very flexible feet, tarsi. And actually what it does is it goes and it puts its foot into holes in trees or crevices and actually pulls out nestlings. I've even seen one actually with a bat that it had pulled out of a hole. And what's really interesting about them is that the facial skin, that bare skin on their face, is normally yellow. But when they're hunting and they get quite agitated, they flush bright pink. So the facial skin turns bright pink. And normally you only really get fleeting glimpses of them. And on this particular occasion, this one was just perched really quite close to the vehicle. And so I was able to get a stationary photograph of it. Like I said, I love interactions. And this was another particularly interesting interaction. This heron had just landed, and this is a lilac-breasted roller in flight, and it was really agitated, and it kept dive bombing the heron. And I could only assume, I mean, we were actually on a tender boat. This was in Lake Kariba, so we couldn't really get much closer. But I'm pretty sure that there was probably a nest, because obviously these birds, lilac-breasted rollers, are hole nesters. So it's likely that there was a nest in the vicinity. And whilst the heron is not really a direct threat, clearly it was, it felt intimidated, or its space had pretty much been invaded. And so, yeah, it basically spent some time dive bombing this, the heron. And this was actually in camp at Madikwe. These are birds known as it's a pied babbler. And they're called babblers. There's another one called an arrow-marked babbler, and they're called babblers because that's what they do. They babble and make a great deal of noise all day. But on this particular occasion, I'd been walking along the path, and all I could hear was this endless chirping, 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 chirping. Anyway, it made me very curious, and so I went to go and have a look. And what I found was this very large chick, which was still begging for food. And the poor parents, there was the pair, they couldn't keep up with feeding this chick. As much as they were finding grubs and insects to feed it, the more it shouted. And so this went on for a long period of time. And yeah, this youngster obviously was clearly quite hungry and very, very insistent. So that really brings me to the end of the overall presentation, Rob. I think I'm very happy to answer any questions people might have. And yeah, just to say a big thank you to everyone for listening. And yeah, I hope that it gave you some idea of what 2025 was like on safari for me this year, and in sort of the KAZA area and also in South Africa. So back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Lorraine. So before we dive into the questions, I would like to remind everyone that if you do have questions, please feel free to submit them via the question field in your control panel. Just go to that upper right-hand corner. You see those three lines there. Go ahead and click on those, and it'll pop down the fields, and you can go ahead and put your questions in there. So lots of compliments, by the way, for just a fabulous performance, and your pictures, so incredible. People are asking, what kind of camera gear do you use?
So I've got a Nikon mirrorless and a Tamron, basically a 150 to 600 millimeter lens. So that's mainly what I use. Until very recently, I only went mirrorless after I managed to break my DSLR on Lake Kariba. But yeah, so that's really the camera gear that I'm using. I have the 600 millimeter primarily for birds. On most of the safaris that we go on for mammals, a 600 millimeter is actually way too big, because very often the animals are relatively close. And so long as you've got, if you want, more close-ups, anything from like a 300 to a 400 is going to be more than adequate for most of the photographs that we take.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. So what species of giraffes do we usually see down there on safari?
So the species of giraffes that we primarily see, well, in South Africa, we see South African giraffe, and also in Chobe National Park on 1 or 2 occasions I've seen Angolan giraffe, which are they have a slightly different pattern and they're a little bit lighter. But those are the only 2 species, and it really is primarily the South African or Southern African giraffe that we see on these safaris. So no things like reticulated or Maasai, those are all sort of up in East Africa.
How are their numbers doing?
So it's an interesting question because giraffe taxonomy has gone through a lot of change in recent years. So there's quite a lot of controversy as to how many species of giraffe we have and whether they are actual species or whether they are subspecies. So in Southern Africa, our giraffe numbers are good. I think that possibly when you start going up into parts of East Africa, I think things like reticulated giraffe and so on, I think their numbers may be not doing as well, but ours are doing very well currently.
Got it. Thank you. So you had an incredible pangolin sighting. Are they common in Southern Africa? There are a lot of them.
So sightings of them are incredibly rare. It's difficult to know how many we actually do have because I think they are completely nocturnal normally. So pangolins or ground pangolins, which is the only species we have, are most active between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. in the morning, which is why normally you don't see them. And they're also secretive and often restricted to areas that are quite hilly and rocky. So not that easy to find. What we do know is that they are under incredible threat for their scales. I'm always amazed at how poachers manage to find them because, they are so difficult to find. That said, obviously there are other species of pangolins in other parts of the world which are arboreal and possibly easier to find. But I don't have an actual number that I can give you. I might be able to see if any of the kind of rehabilitation sites might actually have numbers of them. But they're still being really highly trafficked. And most of the ones that I've seen in the past have been ones that we actually have tracking tags on so that we're actually monitoring where they're going. So the chances of seeing a pangolin in the wild are extremely low. When guests tell me they're coming on safari and they want to see a pangolin, that's when I hide underneath my cap.
All right, well, let's talk about something that may be a little easier to see. So let's talk about the lilac-breasted roller. How do they compare in size to a heron?
To what, sorry?
To the heron?
I'd say probably about a third of the size. So they're probably about the size of a little bit smaller maybe than a crow. So yeah, there's quite a big size disparity there. But yeah, the lilac-breasted roller was having absolutely none of that heron. And it persisted in dive bombing it for an incredibly long time. But yeah, significantly smaller.
And I'm assuming they're a little bit easier to see than the pangolin.
Oh yes, no, definitely, yeah. Yeah, we're very fortunate. We see quite a lot of them.
Well, you do have such an amazing collection of photographs. So what happens? What happened when the elephant got too close to the table where the wine and the liquor and the food was located? Did it decide to help itself? Did anything like that happen?
No, it didn't. I mean, they didn't come any closer than they were there. I think there's an innate fear of humans, and it's something that's always interesting to say to guests is, there's a really big difference. So on occasion, we are able to do short walking safaris, and the difference in behavior of an animal, of any animal, when you're on foot compared to when you're in a vehicle is, it's a little bit like day and night. So in a vehicle, you can get really quite close to the animal without it reacting or feeling threatened. But when they see you on foot, we're basically the only animal out there that's walking upright on two legs. And I think there's a collective historic memory probably that humans have hunted animals, throughout Africa's history. And so they're much more wary of humans on foot. And so their instinct is to move away, not towards. And so, the fact that we were out of a vehicle sitting on a deck, they didn't come and sample the Mazoe orange juice.
So what are some of your favorite animals that you see in Southern Africa on our trips down there? Anyone in particular or two?
It's always a difficult one. So I really, really do like spotted hyenas. And I love them for a number of reasons. One is that they are physiologically just incredibly unique. They're incredibly smart. There's been a lot of work done on them by a researcher in East Africa called Kay Montgomery. And she has found out so much about their social structure, their social behavior. The fact that also they look very much like dogs. But if you look at their phylogeny, if you look at, their evolutionary history, they're much more closely related to cats. And a lot of their inquisitiveness, especially when they're young, is very much more cat-like than it is dog-like. I love them. And then I also, I love elephants. I think that just their whole social structure as well is just, it's so incredibly unique. And then the other things I love the small stuff. So I love the reptiles, I love the insects. But guests, generally, it takes a while to get them interested in those.
So what time of year is it best for me to come down if I want to come see as much as I can?
So, I think the times that Nat Hab run the safaris, which basically start in June and end in October, that whole window is a really good one because it's our winter. So it's drier. The vegetation is much less dense. And animals are very often forced to water sources to drink. So there's not water lying around everywhere in puddles. So depending on how much you can tolerate the heat. So the closer to June you come, the colder it is. The more you get towards October, the warmer it gets. But that whole kind of period is what we would consider like our prime safari time.
Got it. Well, thank you for that. Unfortunately, Lorraine, that is going to be the last question that we do have time for today. So I'm going to throw it back to you for any closing comments.
Thanks, Rob. And yes, just to say thank you again and just to wish everyone a really happy festive season. And just out of interest, the two flowers here, it's known as the Kalahari Christmas tree. So those are our Christmas decorations. And yes, just to wish everyone a very happy Christmas and hopefully see some of you on safari in 2026. Thanks, Rob.
Lorraine, thank you for taking the time to present for us today. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season. And I'd also like to thank everybody who joined us today. So if you are interested in information on how you can travel to South Africa with Nat Hab, please give us a call at 800-543-8917, or you could send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. With that, I will conclude the presentation. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Goodbye, and we shall see you next time.